welcome again. Now we've come to the second session, and remember what we said we would do? We would do the pan process. But before we get into the pan process, there's one concept we need to address. It is a very common response to the question, does God exist? And it is called agnosticism. Now, to the question, does God exist? The obvious answers are yes and no. So is there a real, true third option called agnosticism? Let's look at the word first. What does it mean? A means without, gnosis means without knowledge. So when applied to our discussion, it means an inability to make a decision because the information and the knowledge is simply not sufficient. It is the most honest response to this big question. And it also has a mathematical base. The Austrian mathematician Kurt Gödel described what he called the incompleteness theorem. The incompleteness theorem says that if you are ever going to call a theory as the truth of the matter, then you should have in your hand every piece of applicable information that can be considered for that theory. Unless you know all of the pieces of information that applies, you cannot call it the truth of the matter. Now, you and I will easily confess that nobody on earth has all the information relating to the existence of God. So, everyone on earth, you and I and everyone else, is by mathematical certainty an agnostic. However, some people say they are believers and the others say they are atheists. We just said that everyone is an agnostic. So when you put all those two together, and all the factors together, we come across a very interesting situation in which there are 6 options. I'm going to put them on the screen and we'll look at them. Did you notice something? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all of them are agnostics. Agnostic 1, if you look at the description, he is convinced that God exists and lives as if he exists. He's a believer. Number 2 is an agnostic who is convinced God does not exist and lives as if he does not exist. He is an atheist, a disbeliever. The rest 4 are agnostics. So, when you look at those, first of all of them are agnostics. But there are some words in italics, lives as if. I wanted to follow as we read lives as if. Agnostic number 1 lives as if God exists. Agnostic number 2 lives as if God does not exist. Agnostic number 3 lives as if God exists. Agnostic number 4 lives as if God does not exist. Agnostic number 5 lives as if God exists. And agnostic number 6 lives as if God exists. Did you notice something? They are all agnostics, that's number 1. Number 2, there are actually only 2 ways to live. We live, an agnostic lives as if God exists or as if God does not exist. That is because these are the only 2 true practical options. Agnosticism by itself is only a theoretical position, only on paper. Consider this now. These 2 options we have, God exists, God does not exist. They are so far apart, so distinct, that we cannot bring them together by any means possible. Now when that happens, there are 3 principles that apply here. Principle number 1, these 2 are mutually exclusive. What do we mean by that? it means that if you are on this side, you definitely are not on this side. If you are on this side, you are not on this side. In other words, both of them cannot be correct, one or the other. Principle number 2 that kicks in is that these two are jointly exhaustive, meaning those two exhaust all the possibilities that one can think of. There is nothing else. Jointly, together, they exhaust all the possibilities. Therefore, both cannot be wrong. So now, if both of them cannot be correct, if both cannot be wrong, then the third option comes in, the third principle comes in. And it is called the principle of the excluded middle. In other words, you cannot take some from here and some from there and form a third option. It's an excluded middle. In other words, the middle ground called agnosticism is actually not a true option. It is the most honest answer, and we recognize that. Think, nobody gets any marks in school for a true and false question to which the student writes, I don't know. If you say, I don't know, you don't get any marks. The options are only true and false. Similarly here, the question is, does God exist? The only two answers can possibly be, yes, he does, or no, he doesn't. To say, I can't make an answer is to confess that you don't have an answer. Therefore, agnosticism is really not an answer to the question. So it's a startling realization that a middle ground is not real. Therefore, agnosticism, while it is the most common response, is totally impractical in life. An agnostic believer then lives as if God exists, as a theist. An agnostic disbeliever lives as an atheist, as if God does not exist. In other words, nobody can live as an agnostic, a pure, unqualified agnostic. Now that we have set the question of agnosticism aside, we may turn our attention to the big and the truly controversial debate. Does God exist or does he not exist? I call it the Great Divide. A, we saw that. God, non-existence, fictitious. B, the believing side. God in existence and factual. We'll repeat the challenge. We should not only be fair and balanced in our assessment, but we should make a deliberate attempt to show that we are being even-handed and fair. We should give both sides the same chance to win. Only then can we be sure that the real winner has won. And we said earlier that one way to do this is to implement the PAN process. And that's what we're going to do just now. We'll start it off. Here's the PAN process, a pro and a con for each side. Column 1, arguments for A. Let's start there. Arguments for atheism. None. Wow. Doesn't that sound amazing, startling? Do you know why? Because the only proof of atheism is disproof of theism. So that belongs to the second column. So there's nothing in this column. That's number 1. Number 2 reason why we say there are no arguments is that this statement is in the negative. It's a negative statement. God does not exist. God is non-existent. A negative statement is valid and can be accepted only when all the possibilities have been exhausted. For example, if I claim that my dad was not at home and our house had 20 rooms, how many rooms should I have inspected before making a true and legitimate claim that my dad is not at home? All 20. If I left out even one room, I could not make a legitimate claim that my dad was not at home. So, in other words, to say that somebody is not here, you should look at all the possibilities and exhaust them. Now, applying it to our question, look, if God is in existence, He has to be somewhere. We can't say He's nowhere. If He is nowhere, He is non-existent. So He's got to be somewhere. Honestly, do you know? Honestly, do you know every corner of your town, of your state, the whole world? How about the moon? How about the sun? The sun is only one star in our Milky Way galaxy. Do you know how many stars there are? 200 billion stars in our Milky Way galaxy. How about the number of galaxies? The astronomers have guesstimated that there are about 600 billion with a B galaxies in the known universe. Think. So how many places have we really been to come back here and say, well, we've checked it all out? He's not anywhere. Doesn't that really sound incredible, difficult to believe? On the other hand, God can possibly move about. Because if we can move, why can't He? So if we went looking for Him in the kitchen, He could have gone to the living room. So what are we saying? We are saying that to make a real, credible claim that God is not anywhere, we should not only know every nook and cranny of the universe, but we should know them at the same time. Then it is legitimate. Now, those attributes of being everywhere is called omnipresent, and knowing every bit of the universe is called omniscience. Those are the attributes of God. So, to say that there is no God, you will have to have the attributes of God, but that is contradictory, can you see? Or maybe you'll have to become a God yourself. But then if you become a God yourself, you can't say there is no God. So, there are no arguments in this column. What grade would you give it? Let's grade every column, and then we'll put the grades together at the end. I gave it was 0 to 1, I gave it a 1. That's column 1. Arguments for atheism, 1 mark out of 10. How about column 2? Arguments against the claim that there is a God. There are a few. I'm going to pick out one which appears to be quite a strong big one. It is the argument that if there is a loving, almighty God, then how can that be squared with all the pain and suffering and evil that there is in the world that we experience every day? There's a severe contradiction, and that is the argument. There's a severe contradiction. All loving, almighty, pain and suffering, Do you know, Epicurus was a Greek philosopher back in the 3rd and 4th century BC. He said these words, either He, God, is not good, or else He is not almighty. Can't be both. And David Hume, a later philosopher, a brilliant thinker, he emphasized that even more. His words, is He, God, willing to prevent evil but not able? Then He is impotent. Is He able but not willing? Then He is malevolent. He has a bad, evil heart. Is He both able and willing? Whence then is evil? And Stendhal, another philosopher, said, God's only excuse is that He does not exist. And those who have looked at these arguments, here's what they say. Wenham said, evil constitutes the biggest single argument. Ed Miller said, the biggest single stumbling block. And James Orr said, it is one of the most crucial protests raised by unbelievers against the fact of God. Powerful? Strong? What would you grade it? I graded this argument as 7 out of 10. But then I looked again. Is this argument against the existence of God, Or is this argument, is it an argument against the type of God there is? So I looked at it a little closer. Is it truly the biggest single argument? Is it the most crucial argument against the existence of God? I looked at it in a few ways. Here it is. I found that everyone is upset about this question of evil, pain, and suffering. In fact, those who believe that God exists also have agreed that there is horrible pain and suffering. And despite the pain and suffering, they believe God exists. Therefore, just the existence of pain and suffering cannot be the deciding factor. Number two, a contradiction in features like we are describing is not proof of non-existence. Do you know, if you take a metal rod, it can be both hot and cold at the same time. One end could be sticking into a block of ice and the other could be over fire. So the same rod, cold and hot. What are we saying? Contradictions require solutions and explanations. They do not give us the license to discard and dissolve the whole entity. Number three, contradiction that we describe now is caused by supernatural features. Almighty, all-loving. Which human is almighty? No human is ever almighty. It is God who is almighty and all-loving. So think, we are looking at supernatural characteristics, almighty and all-loving. So if those supernatural characteristics are there, then God exists. In other words, if there is a contradiction, then God exists who caused that contradiction by His attributes. You cannot use the features and attributes of God to disprove His existence. That would be false reasoning. So here are the choice. Keep the contradiction, keep God, do away with the contradiction, and the argument dies. Number four, we do not suffer 24/7. We also have wonderful things on the other side of the spectrum. Joys, pleasures, wonderful life. Think those are in line with a God who is almighty and all-loving. So really, if absence of God is based on pain and suffering, well then if there is joys and pleasures, then God exists. So both the arguments, remember, we are inquirers who will look at both. So in other words, when you look at both sides, pain and suffering, joys and pleasures, they cancel out each other. But really, if evidence for the absence of an entity as well as evidence for the presence of an entity is found in the same place, then that entity is present. Example, suppose we are at sea looking for land and we have a 360-degree view around us. And we say that if we see a puff of smoke in a certain shape, then that could be evidence for land. For 369 degrees, we do not see that. But at the 360th degree, we do see that puff of smoke shaped like that. Evidence of land. So is there land looking around? Yes, there is. What happened to the 359 degrees in which there was no land? Well, here's the dictum. One piece of evidence for presence will outweigh all the evidence for the absence. So, if evil and suffering, which denote the absence of God, as well as joys and pleasures, which would denote the presence of God, both are present in our lives, then God exists and He is present here. So, the question of evil, pain and suffering, drawn to its logical conclusion, does not support the atheistic side, but places the argument on the side of theism, on the side that there is a God. So, one of the strongest arguments against the existence of God actually points to the existence of God. So, the marks that we gave, 7 out of 10, now have to be shifted out from this column to the next column for theism. How about column 3? Arguments for theism. There are a few, We'll look at one of them. It's called the logical analysis. Logic requires two steps to be credible. Number one, it must have a base statement that everyone agrees to. You cannot start a logical discourse with a statement that is itself controversial. So a base statement everyone agrees to, and on that statement we place our steps of reasoning. That is logic. So we'll look at 4 logical analyses. Number one, logic analysis number one is called the Kalam cosmological argument. All changes have causes, and the clearest changes are starting and stopping. So whatever begins or starts has to have a cause. The universe had a start, established scientifically now, 13.72 billion years ago. And therefore, the universe must have a cause. It did not come about by itself. Logical analysis number 2. It's called the pan-cosmological argument. No effect or product causes itself. Nobody says that this pointer is the cause of the pointer itself. Nor do we say that the metal or the plastic is the cause of the pointer. We could say that the manufacturer is the cause of the pointer. But as soon as we say that, we will agree that the manufacturer is distinct from the product. So the cause is always distinct, separate. The cause then of this universe, which they say is made up of matter, energy, time and space, has to be separate. In other words, we cannot appeal to matter, energy, time and space to be the cause of matter, energy, time and space. The cause has to be distinct and separate. How about logical analysis number 3? It's called the order principle of science in chronology. Chronology means in relationship to time, which comes first and which comes second. All causes produce effects. All effects have a cause, and the cause always precedes the effect. So if the effect and the product is the entire universe, then the cause of the universe preceded the universe. Logical analysis number 4, the order principle of science number 2. This time it's not which came first or second, this time which is bigger and which is smaller. A specific corollary of the order principle is the law that no effect can be qualitatively greater or qualitatively superior to its cause. In other words, the cause is always greater than its effect. Now let's look around to see what we have. The world has life, thinking, matter and energy, time, space, and the laws of nature. So the cause of all of these would have to have an abundance of life, a giant intellect, huge amount of power, massive power, full control of all the universe and able to harmonize all the laws. Let's look at just 2 of those. Intellect and power. Here are the words of Albert Einstein. His feelings take the form of rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. In another place, he calls it an infinitely superior mind. Infinitely superior mind? It could be omniscience. How about power? Do you know a penny, if it is completely converted into energy, will provide the full energy of the atomic bomb that was blasted over Hiroshima? Imagine one penny, if you converted it completely into energy, would provide that much of energy. What if we converted this whole room into energy? Wow! What if we converted all the stars? 200 billion stars in our Milky Way galaxy. 600 galaxies, about 100 billion stars each. Woo! And that too is only less than 10% of the total mass. The rest is dark energy, dark matter which we can't even see. So, it's an enormous amount of energy required to produce such a stupendous quantity of mass is mind-bending. Clear conclusion of that is that this cause may be called infinite or omnipotent. So here's Aristotle, the father of modern day logic, who said that the cause of this universe or the cause of the world has to have certain characteristics like omnipotence and omniscience. See those bolded letters and bolded words? So what's the conclusion of the logical analysis? 4 points. The universe has a cause. The cause is separate and distinct from the universe. The cause preceded the universe. And the cause could possibly be called omnipotent and omniscient. This cause then could be reasonably called God because he has all those qualities. Think now of what we've just said. This conclusion was reached by evidence and logic alone, without a single reference to any religious writer or founder. Are you willing to say, wow? What grade would you give it? I give it an 8 out of 10. Because the argument really now, you will agree, is pretty strong. We've done 3 of the 4 columns. We will do the 4th in the very next session. So don't go away. Come back and we will do session number 3 of God, Fact or Fiction.
If you have enjoyed this presentation with Dr. Subodh Pandit and wish to watch more of this unique 13-part series for free online, visit the website godfactorfiction.com. That's godfactorfiction.com. If you would like to order this fascinating series on DVD, it is now available from Whitehorse Media. To order from within the U.S., call 1-800-782-4253. Dr. Subodh Pandit has written 2 eye-opening books entitled Come Search With Me, Does God Really Exist? And Come Search With Me, The Weight of Evidence, which further explore the topics of evolution, theism, atheism, and religion. To order these books from within the U.S., call 1-800-782-4253. That's 1-800-782-4253. If you live outside the U.S., you may also easily order them on Amazon.com.